Hello. Welcome to tonight's bedtime story by Lucid Tales. I hope your day has held you gently in the palm of its hand. But whether it has been soft waves or riptides for you, it's time to relax now. Find somewhere comfortable, maybe your bed or a favourite armchair, and make sure you're ready for sleep. Take your shoes off if you can, and feel the freedom in your toes, the little loosening that means it's time for bed. Tonight's story is from Brittany, about the girl who saved her lover from a fearful Groac'h. Once, a long time ago, back when the world was a little younger and perhaps wiser, there were a young woman and a young man. His name was Groac'h, hers Bella. Their mothers, while they lived, had been close friends, and so the two of them had grown up together, playing in the same cradle, swimming in the same rivers, fighting in the same fights, and always they ran home together, muddy-faced and laughing. They were thick as thieves, and as they grew older and travelled the paths of loss and grief, youth and life, their friendship blossomed into romance. But of course, with no family, the young couple had not the money for marriage, and so with a heavy heart, Groac'h decided that he must leave their small hamlet and make his way in the world, to return when he had the money to marry Bella. Seeing he was set on his path, Bella, wise and gentle, gave her lover two gifts, a knife and a bell. "This knife, made of iron," she said, "will dispel all enchantments. If ever you are unsure of the reality of your eyes, merely touch the blade to what you distrust, and you will see it as it truly is. The bell, too, has magic, and will keep you safe. Wear it around your neck on this strong twine, and when you are in need, help shall come to you." But Bella did not tell Groac'h about the third item, a fine wand that she kept by her against a time when it would be needed. And so Groac'h left his home and walked all the long way to the roaring and iron-grey sea, to the small fishing village of Pont-Aven, where it sits brooding over the mouth of the Avon River as it meets the cold waves. There Groac'h found cool welcome, for he was a stranger, but he was hired readily enough for his strong back and willing hands. The village folk saw to it that he had a roof and bed, and were kind enough in their hardy way, but did not seek out or welcome friendship. It was a hard and strange time, when dangerous magics were abroad, and no one knew if a stranger might be truly what they seemed. Still, they made him a place, though a stranger's place, in their wine shop when he chose. And it was there, in that smoky, rush-lit room, while the rain lashed against the windows and the wind howled through the night, that Groac'h first heard of the Isle of Loch. The men told stories while the storm raged outside, tales of great wealth and riches to be found in the lake on the isle, treasure enough for a king, if only someone dared to brave its fairy guardian. Groac'h listened silently while the men spoke, his wine cup forgotten in his brown hands. He thought of his beloved Bella, of the longing within him for his own hearth, of the many months of toil in the stormy waters of the Channel. And at length he spoke. "Where is this island?" Silence fell, and eyes looked away. A bad luck question, an omen, a stranger's unwelcome curiosity. But at last a fisherman drained his cup and replied, "Les Glenons." A group of rocky, treacherous islands, shrouded by mist out in the Bay of Biscay. There were oyster beds there, but they lay untouched, protected by some unspoken, sinister suspicion that kept the oyster workers away. But Huan was young, and after all a stranger, and so the next morning he left the fisherfolk of Pont-Aven and walked along the coast all the way to Concarneau, where he stole an unwatched boat and sailed the 12 miles out to Les Glénans. The sea was calm for winter, strangely shimmering and still, like a mirror. The ripples pushed by Huan's boat fled out before him like a cry to wash on the rough shores of those rocky islands. With the water so still, Huan could easily see the jagged rocks and treacherous places clear under the ripples, and beached his dinghy in a cove on the largest island, Loche. The sun shone down out of a sharp blue sky and lit up the green leaves that still clung to the trees on the shore. As Huan clambered over the rocks and among the bright flowers, a grey mist rolled silently in over the bay and reared up like a great wall around the sunny isle. Further in among the trees, Huan came across a still blue lake, clear as crystal and fringed with willows and reeds. He stepped down toward the edge and caught sight of a small boat, ornately painted and gilded to look like a great swan. It seemed to beckon to him, and he climbed in. This was magic indeed. The boat slid out from the shore of its own accord, and Huan trailed his fingers in the water, raising a little to his lips. What enchantment could create a lake of fresh water and evergreen trees on the wintry stones of an ocean island? As the boat moved, it began to tremble, and beneath Huan it became warm and soft, until he was sitting astride a living, breathing swan, nestled into its soft feathers like a cygnet. Its dark, beady eye glanced back at him, and he clutched at its feathers as it suddenly dived deep beneath the surface. At last the cold rush of sweet water slowed and stopped, and Huan burst out and into air once more, taking great gulping gasps. When he was strong enough, he stood to look about him and saw himself in an enchanted place, before a delicate, turreted castle with snapping pennants and stained windows. All around him was soft grass and rich forest, and beyond that a seeming golden veil of shimmering light. Beyond the veil all was dark, and Huan could see the creatures of the lake outside it, swimming idly on their cold business, a dim disk of sun far above showing the surface. But all within the veil was airy and light and dry, but for a small pond filled with strange fish and lined with glittering black stone. A soft sound made him look up and straight into the eyes of a hauntingly beautiful woman with a cup of wine in her hand and a silver net at her belt. All thoughts of his home and Bella and treasure fled as he drowned in her emerald gaze, for the eyes of a Groac'h are enough to sink even the gods themselves. She smiled and offered him the cup of wine. He took it like a precious gift and drank it without a word, too stunned to speak. "Will you stay with me, Huan?" she asked, and the sound of his name in her mouth made him tremble. He nodded, not trusting his tongue with its clumsy words. The Groac'h smiled even more widely, and leaned down to catch the fish in the pond with her slender hands, depositing them in a golden basket and turning to return to her great home. Huan followed, trailing behind her, thinking that he would not mind if she made him her slave, so long as she would look upon him and smile again. "We shall have a betrothal feast, my love," she said, once they had entered the great hall where a fire blazed at one end, setting the white marble floor and gilded pillars glittering. But Huan barely noticed the riches surrounding him in the wake of the Groac'h's words. He was blessed surely above all men that this wondrous creature would take him as her husband. He stood silent with joy, awaiting her instruction. "Cook these fish for our feast," she told him, handing him the golden basket, and left him. He gazed after her, feeling a terrible pang of grief at her parting. But nonetheless, he went to the fire with the basket and placed it by the hearth to find a pan in which to fry them. As he placed the pan in the fire to heat, he heard strange sounds coming from the golden basket, as though 100 wailing souls wept from a distant room. He leaned closer and saw the fish writhing and flopping still, fearful silver eyes bulging as their flashing scales trembled in the light of the fire. Curious, he reached out and gently touched one with his belt knife. In a heartbeat, where it had lain, a small man stood, and he ran to the edge of the basket and began to haul himself free. "Save yourself," the little man cried as he took off across the floor. "We were all men once. Beware the Groac'h." Horrified, Huarn touched his knife to each of the fish in turn, and each in turn transformed into a little person. Men and women and all kinds, all of whom had been trapped and enchanted by the vicious Groac'h. It seemed that while the iron knife could unravel the Groac'h's enchantments, it could not undo them fully. But Huarn was comforted that he had been saved from eating his own kind. A low growl echoed through the room, and Huarn whirled to see the Groac'h standing slender and tall with her long white dress rippling and roiling like sea foam around her, the silver net no longer tied to her belt but clutched in her long hands. "Join your brethren then, coward!" she shrieked, and before Huarn could even try to escape, the silvery net bloomed like a deadly flower above his head and descended upon him. "Into a toad," she cried, and suddenly everything seemed to grow. The Groac'h soaring high above him in a swirl of silk and water, the fire becoming a raging inferno behind, and those glittering gold pillars thrusting high into the air like great gilded trees. The silver bell fell from around his neck and chimed loudly in the empty air. And miles and days away, Bella looked up. The pale moon rose that night full-bellied and bright, and shone her silvery light down on a dark figure soaring across the sky far below, on cold snowfields, on a pale shore, on a shimmering sea, even piercing deep down through the sweet water of that magical lake, down to where Huarn lurked in the black pond. He did not know how long he crouched there among the reeds, listening to the tiny voices of the strange fish and avoiding the Groac'h's nimble feet and grasping hands. Time passed flat and strange there in that enchanted place where the light was always shimmering and golden. Sometimes he heard her singing to herself, or saw unfamiliar feet stumble along the ground after her. After that, there were always more fish. Bella followed the bright echoes of the silver bell's chimes, all the way from her small hamlet and through the unfriendly, shuttered village of Pont-Avant, through the small town of Consarno and across the water until she reached that same rocky island with its unnatural flowers. There she found the gilded boat and felt the swan's warm, soft feathers, and there she dived deep beneath the water until she came to the Groac'h's enchanted land. Spat out into the shimmering golden light, Bella leapt to her feet and gazed about her. This was like no place she had seen before. But she understood it. She paused briefly to glance into the black stone-rimmed pool and heard the whispering cries of the fish warning her back. She saw toads hopping miserably in the reeds and felt their pain. A soft sound, and she turned, her eyes to the ground, where a pair of shapely feet showed under a skirt like sea foam. "Will you not look at me?" asked a melodious voice, so soft and caressing that hairs rose on the back of Bella's neck and she shivered with pleasure. But unlike Huarn, she had not looked into the Groac'h's emerald eyes, and so she steadied herself and knelt, her Breton skirts flaring around her. Huarn, lurking in the reeds, caught sight of the embroidery at the hem of those skirts, the pattern of his own village, and croaked a helpless warning. I beg your leave, mistress, Bella said, to catch some of these fish for you, as a gift of service. She could almost feel the Groac'h's gloating smile on the back of her neck. But of course, young maid, that musical voice said. Catch me fish, as many as you will. And she laughed delightedly. And so Bella drew herself to her feet, and still looking at those shapely fine feet, she withdrew the fine net she had hidden in her skirts, a black and iron thing, and in one smooth motion cast it high into the air. It bloomed in the air as the Groac'h's silver mesh had, and descended like the same deadly flower, falling and wrapping tightly around the sea creature. Bella looked up into flashing emerald eyes, hot with rage and pain, and commanded, "By your own spell be held." And the Groac'h, screaming with fury, shrank down in a silken swirl until beneath that iron net she was no more than a toad herself. Within moments, the creatures of the pond, the fish and frogs, became human once more, and with the power of iron and her own magic, Bella returned them to their own size. Uarn lurched up dizzily into a man once more, his feet pressing hard into the soft earth and the world shrinking around him like a misshapen dream. "How are you here?" he gasped, clutching at Bella's arms. "The magic of my mother's mothers," she replied. "My silver bell called me, my wand did carry, and my fine iron net caught the enchantress. Now tell me, are there more of you here, trapped outside of this pond? We must be swift, for she will not remain long as she is." And so together, Bella and Uarn searched the entire place from top to bottom in search of their lost fellows, and when all had been found, and held as much of the Groac'h's treasure as they could carry, they gathered into a circle around Bella, and she magicked them up through the sweet, deep water of the lake and out under the open sun again. Of course, the magic of Bella's mother's mothers saved all who were trapped by the Groac'h at that time, but it could not hold off her magic forever, for a Groac'h is a mighty powerful being, a daughter of Oceanos and Tethys, Poseidon, of the Selkies and Ran the Devourer, and the fierce, swift Nereids, a wild and powerful creature, as old as the world at its dawning and heir to the gods. And so it is that even now sometimes an unwary sailor will go missing there, on the Isle of Loch. Good night. Sleep well. And I will see you tomorrow for another bedtime story.